like me and you love to troll for walleye, or actually any species of fish, I'm going to spend a little bit of time today talking about some overlooked factors that you're probably not thinking about that affect lure speed, lure depth, lure action, and obviously how many fish you're going to catch every day. You know, when you look at our 8 steps, we put lure depth and lure speed right up to the top. Actually, the only thing that's more important is being in the right part of the lake and know that there's fish there. Lure depth is the last of the 3 steps that we call above the line, or the where you have to be, or where you have to get your lure, where your boat has to be. And then lure speed is the first thing we talk about below the line, or the what, the presentation part. That's how important we think those are. So we're going to talk about some overlooked factors today, some things that you're not thinking about that are going to help you catch more fish. All right, some things to consider that are actually affecting lure speed and lure depth. They are very easy. Wind, waves, surface currents, and subsurface currents. We're going to focus tonight mostly on subsurface currents because, again, we're talking about overlooked factors, and those are some factors that you really probably don't think about if you're a troller, and I guarantee you're not thinking enough about what subsurface current does to your lure speed and your lure depth, okay? So what do these factors, that wind, wave, surface, and subsurface currents do? They have an effect on your lure speed, they have an effect on your lure action, effect on your lure depth. Now, once we know that and we understand how important they are, we need to be able to measure what's happening below the surface, duplicate it so we can catch fish when we find out what does work, and we really need to understand what is really happening to all of our lures. What is the real story going on below the surface? So let's take a quick look at how these factors, specifically subsurface current, but all these factors together, what is their effect on lure speed and lure action? We're going to go through this very, very quick tonight. Again, we're building on a process, a learning process. We're going to have some deeper dives into each one of these segments a little bit later, but we just tonight want to lay an overview of factors that you're not thinking about to get your mind started and go, man, I am missing some things when I'm trolling. Maybe this may be why my days aren't as good as they should be. All right. So effect on lure speed, effect on lure action. Lure speed and lure action can be very different. The speed that the lure is actually going through the water and the action it has can be 2 different things. I'm going to show you that in a second. Current direction, especially subsurface current, will have the biggest effect on lure action. What are we missing? All right, so let's take our example here. We're pulling the polar craft across the lake at 2 miles an hour, speed over ground on our GPS. There's no current, there's no wind, there's no waves. Our lure is going through the water at 2 miles an hour, and it has a 2-mile-an-hour action, okay, whatever that action is. Now, we know for a fact, and we're going to spend some time on it again a little bit later, but we know for a fact that speed very, very rarely affects how deep a crankbait dives, especially an on-weighted crankbait. So we know it's not that big of a deal. The speed is not that big of a deal. The action can make a difference. All right, let's take that same speed over ground, 2 miles an hour on our GPS. Let's be trolling with, or going with, a half-mile-an-hour current. That lure now, even though the boat is pulling that lure through the water 2 miles an hour, the current is pushing it forward at half-a-mile an hour, so it only has 1.5 miles action. We've actually lost a little bit of action. Let's turn around and go the other way. Now we're trolling into a half-mile-an-hour current, and a half-mile-an-hour is a very, very small current, so you can imagine what this is like if we have a 1 or 1.2 mile an hour current. It really affects your lure. Speed over ground is exactly the same. Our boat is still going 2 miles an hour, but now our lure, because it's going into and being affected by that half-mile current, is actually, even though it's going through the water 2 miles an hour, it actually has a more aggressive 2.5 mile an hour action. So in a half-mile an hour current going one way versus the other, we have a 1.5 mile an hour current, a 1.5 mile an hour action one way, and a 2.5 mile an hour action the other way, even though our speed over ground is exactly the same. Can you start to maybe see days that you caught fish going one way and not the other? Okay, start thinking about that stuff. Okay, we can all, those other, the wind, waves, subsurface, and surface currents also have an effect on lure depth. Remember I said lure speed has little effect on the depth of on-weighted crankbaits. We know that from about 1 to 3 miles an hour, crankbaits run about the same depth in that speed range. Doesn't really matter. You're not going to go, as long as that lure has got its action that it's designed to, all the way up to the speed where it starts to lose that action, anywhere in that box of speed, your lure is going to be about the same depth. You're not going to gain or lose depth based on speed. But lure speed has a large effect on the depth of weighted lures. Once we add inline weights, snap weights, tadpoles, divers, lead core, it really makes a difference. So these factors can affect our lure depth. Let's go on the water with on-weighted crankbaits, okay? Most people think that a crankbait, when it's in the water, runs from your offshore board in a straight line down to your lure. That's not what happens. Most of that line is on the surface of the water, so the line actually creates a bow. So let's go out, no wind, no current, nothing going on. Let's say we got 100 feet of line out on a reef runner. It's going to get down about 20 feet. With no current, we're just rolling. That lure is going to get down 20 feet. Now let's add this subsurface current. We start trolling with the current. Now our action is going to change, right? Our action is not going to be as aggressive, but it's still in the parameters of where our lure works. So our lure depth is still going to be about that same 20 feet, almost right dead nuts on, okay? Uh-oh, let's turn around and go into a subsurface current. Now, we know the action is going to change. It's going to be more aggressive. We know that the lure is still going 2 miles an hour through the water, but it has a more aggressive action, but that subsurface current is actually going to grab this bow in the line and actually lift that lure up, create more pressure on the line and lift it up. So, have you ever caught fish going one way? You can't catch them going the other? I've just showed you that it could be lure action, it could be lure depth. One way you're going into the current, your lures are higher, the fish like it. The other way you come back, same amount of line out, same speed over ground, your lure is too low. Lots of things to think about. Let's add weight, lead core, inline weights, snap weights, divers, tadpoles. You put a little weight, now everything changes because that speed affects our lure depth more, and we still get a lift from that subsurface current if we're going into it on our weighted lure. Uh-oh, and because we have weight, especially weight in one spot, if we're running inline weights or snap weights, big hunks of lead, the current actually pushing with is actually going to make the lure depth actually change. Stay tuned for more on that a little bit later. Okay, so the effect on lure depth. Crankbait bill size and bill shape will be affected differently. Long, skinny bills that have a wide action are going to act different in subsurface and subsurface currents than lures that have a small bill. Lots to think about. Weight or the diver or the blade or spoon size are going to have a different effect based on that subsurface current. So a small diver like this is going to be affected different than a lead core. Uh-oh. A non-hydrodynamic diver like a guppy weight going through the water is going to be more affected than a streamlined inline weight. Uh-oh. What's really happening below the surface? Okay? Now we got all these factors. Hopefully we got your mind going. I want to kind of wrap this up with the ability that you need to measure it, duplicate it, and you need to know what's really going on. Now, most trollers speed over ground their GPS. I'm going to tell you in the last year and a half, especially the last 6 months, I've realized that that number right there is really irrelevant. Again, we're going to dig into that a little bit deeper, but that's the last number you need to know. You need to know what's going on down at your lures. How deep are your lures running? What is the speed of your lure down at the depth? What is the current doing? Is the lure going with or against the current? How can we measure that and actually be able to duplicate it? A couple different products. Smart Troll products, little probes that go on each line and send back electronic signals to a transducer that then comes on a tablet. A hard-mounted fish hawk where you have a transducer on the back of your boat, a hard-mounted display unit, a probe, usually on a downrigger, that sends signals back and gives you depth of your probe and gives you speed. So now you know if you go one way it's 2 miles an hour, the other way it's 2.5, you know which way and how strong the current is. Those two options are both permanently mounted. They're in one boat, you can't take them. My favorite is the portable Fishhawk X2. Portable probe, battery operated portable display, a slide deucer that slides on a fishing line on a downrigger cable or on heavy braid like I run it on a short stiff rod. Put a 1 or 2 pound ball on there. I've got a portable unit that I can take with me no matter what boat I'm fishing, no matter where I'm fishing, and get lure speed and know the depth and the temperature where that probe is and know the lure speed. I can see that current, okay? All right, again, remember how important lure depth and lure speed are. And folks, what factors are you not paying enough attention to? I guarantee you, think about the things we talked about tonight. Stay tuned to Teachin Fishin as we dig a little bit deeper into these things over the next couple months. You're going to become a better troller, catch more fish because you know the real story down where you're luring.